Okay, 5 more compositions right here on the subject matter of scale and composition, perspective, the placement of imagery in terms of how it relates to the other images around it, and this one, it's the order in which things have been stamped, which is not a rule, as I say in this video right here, but it probably just happens to be the way that I work. And that's kind of stamping out the dominant forms within a scene, okay? And then filling in around it to complete the compositions, okay? In this, I think my foregrounds are usually the last thing that I do. But it doesn't have to be. I can stamp out those reeds down there, and then stamp out the sailboat. It's not really a big deal. But in terms of the beginning scenic stamper, it's just kind of a, one approach that you can use for this. And if you have any questions about that, maybe this series of compositional arrangements will answer some of those questions you might have on that given subject matter. So if you choose to watch it, hope you enjoy it, and hope these videos on this subject matter are making sense. Okay, here's another video on scale and perspective as it applies to composition within your scenic stamping. Alright, now if you didn't watch the video from 2 videos ago, you can watch that one first. I'll go into a lot more things in depth with that, but this one's just going to be based on putting some compositions together with some of those principles that I talked about in that previous video. But let's see, let's just look at some different compositions here, or different elements here, and we'll bring them into a composition, okay? Alright, now we have, sometimes it's really easy, what comes first, what comes second, or what's the closest to you, and what's the farthest from you, from a visual standpoint, okay? Now we have this one right here, it's waves medium, and then here's waves small. You can see that the crests are a little bit closer and more condensed, okay? So they represent something a little bit farther back than this one right here, okay? We do have this image here called Rocks and Waves. There's another stamp that can go with it, and it matches perfectly, and that's Light Rocks and Waves, and that's a lighthouse. But you can also just use it on the shoreline around any type of seascape. I guess it could be a great lake or something like that, just something that has some current and it's whipping up some waves in here, okay? But, alright, what comes first? Do you put the foreground first? Do you put the midground, or do you put the background first? For the most part, I think it's easiest to kind of lay down some of the images that are the largest, because I feel that I can fill in with smaller images around it. That's not always a rule or anything like that. You can work it in different ways. I can put in the background and add some foreground in here. The way that these stamps blend, you can just overlap them, so it's not so critical, in terms of these images at least, about which one goes on first. But I feel that the wave stamp right here might be kind of more of the focal point, or the main image, I would, what I'm saying? Not by a lot though, but maybe by a little. So I'm just going to blend this in here like so, okay? Now the Rocks and Wave stamps feature a lot of solid area, okay? So I can just stamp that right on into the foreground and not really worry too much about what I've already placed within the scene, okay? Now you notice I'm not trying to match this up perfectly like a puzzle piece or something like that, edge to edge. I'm overlapping it and hopefully getting rid of some of the lines that can occur if I placed it too carefully, okay? I would see this edge right here matched up perfectly with this edge. It would be a little bit more apparent, okay? Alright, here's some other ways in the distance. I guess not too distant, but farther back at least than these ones right here, okay? Now, I mean, I could just make this out at deep sea and place a couple more waves right here, as if we're, you know, looking into the scene from the bow of a ship or something like that. But let's put us as a viewer on the shoreline, and we'll add these rocks and waves. Okay, it's a very stormy sea right there. I think I would get seasick if I was in something like that. But it can make for a nice dramatic landscape or foundation. Okay, now see, I'm just placing that right over the top of it. I don't know, for me I can't really tell where one image ends and the other one begins. I mean, I guess I could, you know, if I really looked, but for the most part things are blending together fine. No need for masking. Alright? But anyways, what do we have here? We have, in this case, kind of a more condensed space in here. I don't have some kind of distant island out there, although you could do that. I could put some palm trees or something like that out there. It's hurricane season in the tropics or something like that. But we have foreground, midground, and background right there. Now, if I put something back there, off in the distance, then that would become the background, right? Alright, so where do you put something like this? Here's a little boat, okay? If I put that boat down here, it's saying that those waves are really, really large, okay? But if I put this farther back or higher up in the composition, which represents distance in terms of Western composition, then these waves in the foreground, who knows how tall they are? Maybe instead of it being, I don't know, like a 15-foot wave or something like that, you know, in relation to this. Unless it's a little toy boat or something like that, but I don't think people are going to think that initially, alright? If I put it back here, that makes these waves much smaller by scale, in scale, okay? So, do I want to make it super stormy? Put this little boat and its crew in peril, like that. Or do I want to put it a little bit farther back? It looks like it can kind of go anywhere. I think it'll look good down there. I think it'll look good back up here, over here. You know, this is one of those instances where, I don't know, I don't think one stands out more than the other to me, so let's see. I kind of like how these waves are kind of all pointed in this direction, and if I put that there, it kind of becomes like a visual anchor point. Although if I put it down here, it would be too. You know, your eye would go right to this, but I like the way all those waves are kind of pointing up to that, and maybe that's where I'll put my subject matter, or my visual focal point, alright? A lot more rocky and treacherous on shore, but maybe in the distance like that, maybe that boat is kind of in the clear as far as danger is concerned in the crashing rocks, okay? But you can also do some other things. You can streak in some color like that, or I can put a moon in the background. I could moon rise or moon set, sunset too. I can put a sun in there and have it shimmering on the water like so. But that's a pretty good foundation as far as midground, foreground, and background, okay? In the background now we have a real focal point, and that tells us kind of the scale of how choppy those waters really are. Okay, so your location of things like that can really influence the overall composition in terms of the subject matter. Alright, boy, I'm going to have a lot of stamps around my work space after this, after these two videos. Okay, let's see, we have the country chapel image right here. Alright, in nature set number 7, if anyone has that, country chapel large, tree cluster, and sedge filler, okay? Now, we have these trees that are roughly the same size as the country chapel stamp, okay? So, I think we would assume that these trees would probably be close to these in terms of distance, okay? I could put it much lower on a composition like this down here if we were doing like an elongated half-page lengthwise portrait, you know, configuration of a scene, you know, and I can have these trees down here, but if I put them closer to it, it's saying that those trees are roughly the same size as those ones and probably the same type, okay? But let's do something here, okay? Let's utilize this tree here. Now, I've done these trees in other videos. I really love the tree cluster design because of the different ways you can use it, okay? All right. Let's go with a landscape format, horizontal in terms of the length of it. Images with a lot of surface area, I say this all the time, you have to get kind of good pressure in the middle of it. Doesn't matter how big the design is, if this huge design was just a one linear circle or something like that, there's very little surface area, so you don't have to press too hard, but this image is fairly dense and detailed with a lot of solid areas, so press enough in the middle right there, okay, to get your good, strong, adequate impression. Okay, let's do this, okay. Let me just add some more trees, like about like so. I'll have it going off my page, like that. And I did that for a reason. I left a little bit of space in here, and you'll see what I do with that. Okay, let's see, there's some trees in the foreground, okay. Let's just utilize the same ones, the tops of the tree cluster. Okay, so we have something like that. What do these ones represent? They represent something closer to us because they're lower on the composition, therefore they're closer to us, all right? But now let's fill in a little bit with our Sedge filler stamp, okay? I'm going to be careful not to stamp it right on into the chapel, but I might go right up to those steps and go over those steps a little bit. It puts a little bit of texture in there, but nothing to kind of cover up what we already have going back in there as far as texture goes. To have a little bit more texture in there is not a big deal. Alright, now the Sedge filler stamp is being used where? It's being used in the foreground, midground, and background, right? So the Sedge filler in this case represents, you know, some distance back up on that hill and there. This one right here, it's more of this front, you know, lawn, who knows. I can have I don't know, maybe no one's attending this chapel. You can do a path or something like that leading up to it as well. But let's go back to that tree, okay? Let's go back to the tree cluster. Alright, if I add this in its entirety right up there, I don't know, I think that would look kind of weird. You know, I guess I can add it a little bit lower. But you're saying that those trees are much larger, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use scale to represent distance as far as it applies to this image. I was going to mask off of that. I don't think it's thick enough here. Maybe I think I just tore that off. I think I tore off one ply as opposed to the two ply. Okay, where do I want some of these trees? Okay, let's just add the tops of them right back in here. You know, what I'm doing is I'm not saying that, you know, most of this tree is buried under the earth right here. I'm just putting the tops of them up there to create smaller trees. So what we're doing is we're representing distance, not only by the location it's being used on the scene, okay, but also by scale, just using the tips of it, okay? Maybe they're smaller trees, I don't know. But, or maybe they're they're very large trees, but you just see the, you know, the tops of them, or that's the size of them there. Because they're farther back in the distance and you're using kind of perspective. And when you do this type of thing, even though we're not using the whole tree, okay, when you have the tops of these trees back here, what that does is it's a repetition of form, okay, throughout, but you're using it in kind of a smaller scale. It is the same scale, but just a smaller bit of it, okay? And that creates a kind of a nice visual continuity and harmony within the background, midground, and foreground, all right? So that can kind of create, I don't know, like I said, a visual harmony within the scene, like that. And it kind of brings everything together. Okay, now I've left that area up there. You know, you can do something like a moon or something like that, or it can just be some little streaks of color in there to represent, you know, various times of day, depending on what color you add in there. So wide open as far as what you can do with this. Now, it would have been nice to have some of those trees green, but that's not what this video here is about, okay? But you can go into this and color this in still, okay? With whatever you want. Dusk, dawn, anything. All right, now, let's see here. Okay. Someone wanted me to do a scene with this, and maybe I'll do a couple stamp sketches with it for right now. This is the large Seaside Cove stamp. This is my idea on this one when I designed it years and years ago, okay? This would kind of make an interesting, I have to zoom out for this one. A nice composition right there for a scene, okay? Shoreline, whatnot. This would be a nice scene right here, and so would this. But if I did those in 3 different designs, then if I wanted to do a larger scene, I would have had to kind of match them together nicely. Could have been done, but I put it all in one so that you can use whatever part of it you want. And I have a separate video on this, even this part up here. I've seen this part right here stamped and then stamped again and stamped again, you know, re-inking in between, and it became this river, you know, coming down. It's really a cool use of the design and just using the certain portions for what you want, okay? Which is completely in the spirit of scenic stamping. I loved it. Scenic stamping, you can stamp things in its entirety, or you can just use little bits of it for your own purposes of what you're doing on your scene. Okay, talk about a large stamp and pressure, okay? It still is a 1/4 page card, but plenty of pressure in the middle of it, okay? As well as the sides. In other words, don't just stamp it out like that, because when you lift it, it might not have made an impression in the middle. Good. Sometimes I'm doing that and I pull up and it's like, oh my god, you know, after everything I said it didn't stamp out in the middle. That's when one of those stamp positioners comes in handy. Okay, so we have the sea scene right here. Let's do something. Okay, now in this one right here, we do kind of inherently have, you know, kind of background, midground, and foreground, because we do go from this shoreline all the way back onto the horizon line. The horizon line usually represents, you know, quite a bit of distance, right? But if you want to go even farther back in space, I'm talking about, you know, just in terms of distance, not space as in, you know, spaceships and, you know, out of our atmosphere. But I guess in this case, we are going out in space with a moon, okay? It could be just clouds or something like that, okay? But you can mask off this if you want to. You know, I just placed down a paper towel, but I'm just going to go with this moon right down into that area, okay? If I did overlap it a little bit, not a big deal. I don't know, it's a big deal to some people, but it's never a big deal to me. Sometimes People are very, very particular. And as I've seen over the years in some of my workshops, someone will say, what? They'll be stamping a couple things out, and they'll say, a dot from that got into my other, image. And I'll say something like, well, that's kind of the idea of it, to make things nice and seamless. You do want some overlapping, and kind of they have to get over that. All right, so there's a moon kind of up on the horizon, and as I was coloring this in, I would, darken my horizon to make a little bit of a separation between land and sky, or in this case, sea and sky. But what do we have now? That moon really became the background, right? It's much more distant background, and this is probably the midground in here or something like that in foreground, so suddenly something very distant became more, closer to us. Okay, we have that. What would these birds represent? These are some gulls. I don't know, something that's maybe 50 yards from us or something like that? Who knows? Oh, you can also put things like that. Fishing boat in there, sailboat, whatever you want. Whale. Actually, that would be kind of interesting. I have this breaching whale now. I'm not going to do it right now, but... Okay. So, background, midground, foreground. Let's add in some reeds here, some beach grass maybe. What are we doing? We're pushing the space, right? Because it is so much farther down on the composition. So much farther down, it's going off of the page. Okay. Maybe the larger one would look cool. Actually, this one looks pretty good too. I usually don't stamp out so much of it, but kind of beach grass is, fairly full, so doing something like that kind of anchored down the composition down there. And having it so low, what is it? It's really close to us in terms of composition and perspective, okay? Here's a sailboat. I was talking about that. Let's add that in here, like so. How's that as far as composition goes? Pretty quick, right? All right. Now, let's do something just with sky, okay? Within scenic stamping and Stampscapes, I guess you can say, one of the nice kind of genres within a genre are skyscapes, all right? I really enjoy just doing skies sometimes. Let's do something here. Let's stamp it at a little bit of an angle just for kicks, okay? Sometimes I like doing things at a little bit more of an angle. Kind of having these angles within a composition creates kind of a movement, a visual movement, and a kind of a dynamic element to your scene. So don't always do things completely horizontal. You could, but sometimes if you slant things off slightly, there creates this kind of a, I don't know, like I said, a dynamic kind of element to the scene. I don't do it enough. I should do it more. My instinct is not to do things at an angle, though. I'm so used to having a kind of a horizon line in my cameras when I'm, shooting pictures and whatnot. And always kind of tilting it so that that horizon line is in the green. But sometimes in stamping I do that. Alright, so we have our cloud with moon large and our cloud bar. Alright, where's that cloud bar? It's probably something that's closer to us because it's lower on the horizon. Or lower on the composition. That's up and down, right? Where's this up and down? With skyscapes, it really doesn't matter, does it? Okay, but here's what I'm about to do. Okay, here's some other clouds up here. And one of the things that I did was I flipped it upside down like that, because these clouds are somewhat lit, okay? If I have it like this, they're being top lit, right? And if there's a moon or something right here, then if I flip it upside down, then these clouds are bottom lit. The light is coming from below, right? And that's the case here, so what do you do right here? I could have this kind of like this if I want to. That, or I could go like that. It really doesn't matter. But overlap, so that you don't have all these seams showing, okay, of where one stamp ends and the other begins. Alright, you want it nice and seamless, okay? Maybe something like that. I think in this case it kind of represents something like where it could be where you're lying on your back and looking up at the clouds and the full moon or whatever. And these clouds around the perimeter are closer to us, okay? It's now, you know, the ones on the top and the ones that are at the bottom are probably at the same distance because we are talking about something in the sky, okay? And we're looking up at it, okay? Most scenes we're looking across at something, okay? So these ones right here, it'd be like this. It'd represent kind of this funnel of space going back into the distance there. This will be one that I'll finish off maybe. I really feel like adding some tone around it. I'm just itching to do it right now, but I'm going to try to stay on task here. Alright. So skyscapes. Skyscapes are really fun. Oh, one of the things I was going to say about that. Skyscapes are really fun. I like doing things like, I don't know, Milky Ways, moons, suns, whatever. Kind of like you're lying back and looking up at them, or just tilting your head and looking back up. But one of the things I like to do too is I like to add in like a closer foreground. You can do anything you want. You can do pine trees like that. I can have the pine trees circling around like that. Okay, so it's like you really are lying back on the forest floor or something like that and looking up at a sky object. Or I could be looking across at it or something of that sort, you know, with some kind of branch like this, you know, coming into play. You can do different types of things too. It doesn't have to be one image, right? This one right here would be kind of interesting, right? It'd be really interesting. I don't know, thematically, if I had some bats or something like that, that would be kind of interesting. Or this one right here. I guess of this one too. This one is called Spooky Branch, although it doesn't have to be used as something spooky. Alright, let's see. Let's do something like this. Okay, let's add some foreground imagery to this. And suddenly, instead of these clouds around the perimeter being kind of the foreground, at least as it applies to this composition. Now, the clouds have all really become backgrounds, okay? Especially that moon, probably the most distant object. I mean, there's some space around it. But, okay, let's do something like... How about this? Actually, this might be kind of interesting. I'll do that. Let's do something. This spooky branch has kind of an arc to it. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to add it like this, and this will kind of circle around that moon a little bit. Kind of creates this visual movement, like a drain or something like that. Okay, now we really need a witch on a broom or some bats or something like that. Could use the same gulls, you know. Maybe the gulls, the circling gulls, become ravens or something of that sort. That, like that, huh? But you see this kind of visual movement happening? But what is that branch? Foreground, right? Okay. It's not lower, but it does represent something where it's you know, the branch is a part of something that goes off the page and it's growing from a certain point, you know. I don't know. It's a very different vantage point in that scene. Alright, so let's look at a couple more things here. I pulled these out because they are the same image, just one is, I think this is a, I forgot what percentage of this one. I think this is 70% of that or something. But the Shagbark Hickory, a lot of surface. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you've inked it up all the way, you know, when you get images with a lot of surface area. But, okay, let's talk about scale, alright? Let's do a couple scenes like this. Let's say I have this one up like so. Okay. Now, where would this one go? It's smaller. Would it go lower or would it go higher? Okay? Or does it really matter? Let's put it in the distance. Let's put it higher up because it's smaller. And we're saying probably this tree in the background is roughly the same size as this one, but it's smaller in scale because it's higher up and much farther back. Okay? But let's also put one here lower in the composition. Well, what is that? This looks kind of weird, doesn't it? Because it's smaller, and we're saying that that size of it is farther back in the distance. Well, why can't that tree just be a smaller version than this one? This one's a much older tree. This one's getting much more water where it's located, okay? Sometimes that happens. Or a lot of times it happens in nature. Let's go for this one again, okay? But let's wipe off the bottom of it. Okay, taking off a lot of ink, like so. And I'll put this one back here, kind of just transitioning down a little bit. See that? It transitions. If I didn't take off some of that ink, there wouldn't be any separation between this one and this one in terms of form. Okay, but for the most part, far, middle ground. Close, okay? But let's bring it all together because it looks kind of funny. Well, what do? Our trusty Sedge filler stamp, okay? Alright, so we've kind of anchored it down a little bit more. Certainly some shadows and shading would anchor that into the composition, but we're starting to build a composition. And we have now set that into the grass, and I think it just looks just fine. It's not a problem with that smaller one being in the foreground. Let's add in kind of a little bit of a deeper space. Let's say that there's kind of a skeletal remains of a previously healthy tree. Maybe it's a different tree, I don't know. Something like this in the foreground. And we're kind of just playing around with compositions like this. I call it stamp sketching. And there's a certain freedom that comes along with it in terms of, I don't know, the approach to stamp usage. And that, I don't know, the building aspect of scenes, like I kind of speculated in the previous video, it might be using a different part of your brain, because I'm not thinking too much on an emotional level. You know, when I'm stamping color and things like that, you know, actually you start to think about things like, you know, kind of the mood and setting of a scene. Okay, now that was the large leafless limb stamp. This is its little sibling image. And let's put one back in the distance, or a little bit farther back. It's not real far back, but there's a smaller one in there, like so. Okay. Something like that. Okay, so we have kind of a real natural looking setting with some dead foliage and some live. Alright. You can also put something like this down here, like another tree is in the foreground, but it's kind of off, out of the frame, so to speak. Something like that might be interesting. And again, it is kind of a repetition of form, like even something like this, you know. You're seeing that maybe there's a smaller tree close to you. Maybe it's almost like a bush or something. Okay. Farther back, a little bit closer, and closest. Okay? Higher is usually farther away. Lower is usually closer. Okay? But there's not a rule that says you have to use smaller imagery as backgrounds. It could be used as a background and as a foreground. You know, you're just using bits and pieces, you know, that will serve you for the purpose of which the impression is intended. So, let's take a look at some different scenes here. I really need something in here. I want my little dough stamp or something, or a little... That's kind of interesting. Maybe this one would be more suited for the shoreline one. By scale, it doesn't look like it really fits. They would be right in those waves right there. The waves would be smashing them. If I did it like this, I could put them kind of like they're wading out in the middle of the water. I'd mask that off and put them out there. It kind of becomes more of like a... I don't know, there's some more of a mysterious type of look to it. Let's do that. Let's go for some mystery, and I'll put it in here. Okay. One of the things I like to do is I like to wipe off the feet off of things that are walking through the grass, because if they're walking through the grass and that the grass is, you know, has any height to it at all, you wouldn't be able to see the feet. So things like animals and people, you know. And I have this little clearing in here. I think I'll just place them right about like so. So when you have kind of a reference point in terms of some kind of living thing, you know, you can really kind of measure the scale of these different objects that are around it, because those can be a reference point, because we roughly know, you know, that those people are, you know, unless they're, what was that? I forget the name of that old TV series where there's all these people shrunk down to like an inch high or whatever. But I don't know. I don't think people are thinking that. They're thinking they're average sized people, so that gives kind of a, you know, scale that tells us about the scale of these objects around it, okay? Okay, so let's take a look at these, okay? We have some different scenes in here. Where do you place things? What do you place first? What is the order in which it is stamped out? As you can see, in some instances, you know, these two scenes right here, you know, well, they both feature the moon, but this one's very prominent moon in here. This one's prominent too, but we also have the Seaside Cove. The Seaside Cove, for me, was a little bit more of a dominant image. It's not always the larger stamp is dominant, but quite often it is. So usually I stamp those things first, okay? So I stamped at my chapel, and I worked the imagery around it. that big Seaside Cove, I stamped that first and then worked the other imagery around it, right? On this one right here, there isn't really any kind of super definitive, oops, I just smeared her. That's really a X-Files or something like that now. But I did stamp that larger tree first, okay? And I think it's just easier to work around them like that. Although these ones, you know, I mean, I could have stamped that one first and stamped that larger tree in there second, you know, second or third or fourth, whenever. It really could have come at any given time. But, I don't know, those smallest little things like people and birds, I usually wait till the end to do that, you know. Although you don't have to. Okay, these ones right here. That stamp was the same size as this, right? But it's kind of the dominant feature in here. It covers the most amount of area, so I did that one first. Then comes the filler stamp, you know, foreground. I don't know, is foreground always last? It doesn't have to be, but it usually is. I mean, these people, this one I stamped out, you know, those people last, but I don't know, I stamped out kind of maybe the midground, then I go background, then foreground. I never really thought about it that way because it doesn't have to be done that way. But I'm usually thinking of the dominant features within a scene. Then I probably go back from there and then forward. You know, I did those background trees in there. I don't remember when I did this one at this point in time. I've completely forgotten. But main thing is it could have been done at really any given time. But if I stamp out my main imagery first, then I can just easily work around it, okay? Moon, then clouds, then my branch. Okay. So usually, not on this one right here, these things represent something much closer to us than that moon, right? But they represent something that's kind of planted, you know, right around us as a viewer on the ground, and that would probably be lower on the horizon or whatnot, or coming at you, okay? So anyways, video 2 of scale, composition, perspective, you know, where to place things. I could have placed those people much farther back. I don't know. There wasn't very much room in there, but let's say those people were back there. Then, in terms of scale, it would probably make these trees much... Let me see, if I stamp them farther back, they would be smaller. If I stamp these people much closer to us, it's saying that those trees are farther back, and thus they are grander in scale, okay? Same thing like this, you know, if I stamp that boat down here, then these waves are really huge because they're towering over that little boat, okay? But if I stamp them off in the distance, we're saying that those waves probably aren't quite as large. So, scale, in terms of perspective, changes the scale of the different items around it in terms of the anchor point reference or reference point of something like that. Doesn't always have to have a reference point. I could have a moon up here, and how large are those waves? Who knows? But do we really need to know, you know, in that instance? So anyways, video 2, I hope you enjoyed it. Or I don't know if enjoy is the word. Hope that makes sense in terms of the information that was given. Okay, so if you have any questions, just drop us a note in the comment section. Thanks for watching.